The harsh glow of Emily's phone screen illuminated her face in the darkness of their bedroom. It was 2 a.m., and Nick's gentle snoring beside her felt like a betrayal. 10 years of marriage had taught her to read the subtle shifts in his breathing, but lately, she realized there was so much more she couldn't read about the man lying next to her. She scrolled through his Facebook friends list again, her finger hovering over the profile that had caught her attention 3 weeks ago. Sarah Martinez. Young, attractive, always commenting on Nick's posts with those damn emojis. Emily's stomach churned as she noticed another late-night interaction from earlier that evening. "Thanks for the advice. You always know exactly what to say." Smiling face with smiling eyes, Sarah had written on one of Nick's motivational quotes. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. Emily glanced at her sleeping husband, studying the familiar lines of his face. At 45, Nick still had the boyish charm that had made her fall for him at their company's holiday party 12 years ago. His dark hair was graying at the temples now, but those laugh lines around his eyes only made him more attractive. She used to love how his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her. Now, she wondered who else was making him smile. Their life together had seemed perfect on paper. The colonial house in the suburbs, successful careers, weekend barbecues with friends. But somewhere along the way, the small cracks had started appearing. Nick working later at the office. The way he turned his phone face down when she entered the room. Those networking events that never seemed to show up on his company's official calendar. Emily had always prided herself on not being the jealous type. She remembered laughing with her friends about wives who checked their husbands' phones or tracked their locations. "Trust is everything," she used to say. Now here she was, hands trembling as she tapped through Nick's social media activity like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The next morning, Emily watched Nick rush through his morning routine, noticing how he checked his phone between bites of toast and sips of coffee. "Big presentation today?" she asked, keeping her voice casual as she refilled his cup. "Yeah, huge potential client," Nick replied, not looking up from his screen. "Might be home late tonight. Don't wait up." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Oh. Which client?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Nick finally glanced up, a flicker of something, annoyance. Guilt? Crossing his face. "Just some tech startup. You wouldn't know them." He stood up, grabbing his briefcase. "I should go. Traffic's going to be hell." The kiss he planted on her cheek felt perfunctory, mechanical. Emily watched him walk to his car, noticed how he sat there for a moment, probably checking his phone again, before backing out of the driveway. That evening, while loading the dishwasher, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. Her friend Lisa had tagged her in a photo from their girls' night out last weekend. As she went to like the picture, something caught her eye in the background. A familiar figure at the bar, leaning close to a woman with long dark hair. The same woman whose profile she'd been obsessing over. The plate in Emily's hand slipped, shattering on the kitchen floor. But she barely noticed the ceramic shards scattered around her feet. Her eyes were fixed on the image, zooming in until the pixels blurred. There was no mistake. It was Nick. And Sarah. At Antonio's Bar and Grill, 20 miles in the opposite direction from his office. Emily's hands shook as she opened Facebook again, this time navigating to Nick's profile. Everything looked normal. His profile picture showed both of them from their anniversary trip to Cabo last year. His status updates were mundane, sharing articles about market trends, commenting on friends' vacation photos, posting about weekend plans with "my beautiful wife." But something made her dig deeper. 3 clicks later, she discovered what she'd been dreading, a second account under the name Nicholas Wright. The profile picture was Nick, but younger, probably from 5 years ago. The friend list was hidden, but she could see recent activity. Comments on posts by various women, likes on photos that made her stomach turn, messages that were just visible enough to make her imagination run wild. The sound of a car door slamming snapped her back to reality. Nick was home early. Emily quickly closed Facebook, her heart pounding as she heard his key in the lock. She looked down at the broken plate around her feet, a perfect metaphor for how her world was starting to crack apart. Everything okay? I heard something break, Nick called out, his footsteps approaching the kitchen. Emily gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Everything's fine, she called back, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Just dropped a plate. As Nick appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face, Emily forced a smile. But behind that smile, her mind was already formulating a plan. She wouldn't confront him. Not yet. First, she needed proof. First, she needed to understand exactly what kind of game her husband was playing. And then she would decide whether their decade of marriage was worth saving, or if it was time to show Nick exactly what happened when you underestimated a woman who had given you everything. For the next week, Emily lived in two realities. In one, she was the devoted wife, making Nick's favorite meals and asking about his day. In the other, she was a shadow detective, piecing together the digital breadcrumbs of her husband's deception. The Nicholas Wright account became her obsession. Late at night, while Nick slept, she would study it through a fake profile she'd created. The more she looked, the more her heart sank. There were patterns, comments on certain women's photos, always during his late meetings or business trips. The messaging icon would show him active at odd hours, times when he claimed to be working or stuck in traffic. But it was the photos that truly gutted her. Group shots at bars and restaurants she'd never heard of, Nick in the background with his arm around various women. The timestamps matched perfectly with his excuses about client dinners and networking events. In one particularly painful image, dated just 2 months ago, he was wearing the blue tie she'd given him for their anniversary. During dinner one evening, Emily decided to test the waters. I was thinking of joining some networking groups, she said casually, watching Nick's reaction over her wine glass. Maybe we could go together sometime. Nick's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Oh. What kind of networking? Professional development, meeting new people. You know, like those events you go to. She kept her tone light, but her eyes never left his face. My events are pretty industry specific, he said quickly. Too quickly. Mostly tech people. You'd be bored. Emily took another sip of wine to hide her trembling lips. I don't know. I think it could be interesting. Sarah Martinez seems to enjoy them. The color drained from Nick's face. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, panic flashed in his eyes. Then his features smoothed over, but Emily had seen it. The crack in his facade. Sarah who? He asked, reaching for his water glass. Oh, just someone I noticed on your Facebook. She comments on your posts a lot. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Nick shrugged, but his knuckles were white around his glass. Just someone from the industry. I barely know her. The lie hung between them like poison gas. Emily thought of the dozen photos she'd found, the hundreds of comments and likes, the late-night message exchanges. She thought of the picture from Antonio's, of Nick leaning close to Sarah, his hand on her lower back in a way that was anything but professional. That night, after Nick had gone to bed claiming a headache, Emily sat in their home office, staring at their wedding photo on the wall. They looked so young, so in love, so certain about their future. She opened her laptop and pulled up the folder where she'd been saving screenshots of Nick's second account activity. A new notification popped up on her screen, a friend request from a mutual connection. As she moved to decline it, she noticed something odd. The person had liked a photo on Nicholas Wright's profile. But this wasn't someone from Nick's secret social circle. This was Kevin from their neighborhood cookouts, a friend they'd known for years. With shaking hands, Emily clicked through to Kevin's profile and started scrolling. There it was, dozens of interactions with Nicholas Wright going back months. Comments about guys' night and poker games that had never been mentioned in real life. Emily felt sick as realization dawned. Kevin knew. He'd known all along about Nick's double life. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lisa, "Hey girl, you've been so quiet lately. Everything okay?" Emily stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. Lisa had been there for every milestone of her marriage. The engagement party, the wedding, their 5th anniversary celebration. Now Emily wondered if she'd been blind to more than just Nick's deception. How many of their friends knew? How many had covered for him? She was about to reply when she heard a sound from upstairs, Nick's phone ringing. At this hour? Emily crept up the stairs, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She could hear Nick's hushed voice from their bedroom. "No, I can't talk right now." "Yes, I know about Friday." "No, she doesn't suspect anything." "Look, I'll call you tomorrow from the office." Emily pressed her back against the wall, her hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. Friday. What was happening Friday? She remembered Nick mentioning a late meeting, another client dinner. More lies. In that moment, standing in the darkened hallway of her own home, listening to her husband whisper secrets to another woman, something inside Emily snapped. The hurt and confusion of the past weeks crystallized into cold, clear purpose. She walked back downstairs, opened her laptop, and started typing. First, an email to her lawyer friend requesting a consultation. Then, a message to her bank about opening a separate account. Finally, she pulled up the Nicholas Wright profile one more time. This time, she wasn't looking for proof. She was looking for leverage. Because if Nick thought he could live a double life without consequences, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating his wife. Over coffee at a quiet cafe across town, Emily studied her friend Rachel's face for any sign of prior knowledge. Rachel had been her confidante since college, long before Nick entered the picture. If anyone would give her straight answers, it would be her. "I should have seen it coming," Emily said, spreading the printed screenshots across the table. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he guards his phone like it contains state secrets. Rachel leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she examined the evidence. Honey, are you sure you're not reading too much into this? Nick worships the ground you walk on. He always has." Emily laughed, a harsh sound that made nearby patrons turn their heads. "Does this look like worship to you?" She pointed to a particular photo, Nick and Sarah at what appeared to be a rooftop bar, the sunset casting an ironically romantic glow over their intimate conversation. "Maybe it's not what it looks like," Rachel suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Have you tried talking to him?" "And say what?" "Hey honey, I noticed you're living a whole separate life online, care to explain?" He'd just lie, like he's been lying for months. Emily's hands shook as she gathered the photos. "Did you know about any of this?" Rachel's hesitation was brief, but telling. "I heard rumors. From Tom's colleague at the firm. But I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to hurt you without proof." The confirmation felt like a physical blow. Emily sat back, her coffee growing cold and forgotten. "Who else knows?" Don't do this to yourself." "Who else knows?" Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. Lisa might have seen them together at that new wine bar downtown. And Kevin, well, Kevin's been covering for him at poker nights that aren't really poker nights. Each name was another crack in the foundation of Emily's world. These were their friends, people who'd sat at their dinner table, celebrated holidays with them, watched their marriage apparently crumble in slow motion without saying a word. "I need to know everything," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "Every detail, every rumor, every suspicious moment you've heard about." "What are you planning?" Rachel asked, concern evident in her expression. Emily's smile was cold. Justice. Later that afternoon, Emily sat in her car outside Nick's office building. She'd called in sick to work, something she'd never done without genuine illness in 15 years of employment. The deception felt foreign on her tongue, but she was learning that lies could serve a purpose. She watched as Nick emerged for his usual coffee run, but instead of turning left toward the local cafe, he went right. Emily followed at a safe distance, her heart pounding as he led her to an upscale shopping district 20 minutes away. Through her windshield, she watched him enter an expensive jewelry store. The same one where he'd bought her engagement ring a decade ago. She felt sick, remembering how proud he'd been to afford that ring, how he'd worked overtime for months to save up for it. 10 minutes later, Nick emerged with a small bag, checking his phone with a smile that used to be reserved for her. Emily snapped several photos, her hands surprisingly steady. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. That evening, she made his favorite dinner, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. As they ate, she asked about his day, nodding at all the right moments as he spun his web of lies about meetings and client calls. "I was thinking," she said, refilling his wine glass, "maybe we should have a dinner party this weekend. It's been ages since we hosted everyone." Nick's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "This weekend?" "I don't know, I have that conference." "Oh right, the conference." Emily took a sip of wine. "The one in Chicago?" "Yeah, flying out Friday morning." Emily nodded, remembering the hotel confirmation she'd found in his email, for a romantic boutique hotel downtown, not in Chicago. "Will Sarah be there?" The silence that followed was deafening. Nick's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, attempted confusion. "Sarah? From the office?" "Sarah Martinez," Emily clarified, her voice steady. "The one you've been meeting at Antonio's. The one who's been commenting on your posts for months. The one you bought a necklace for today at Carlton's Jewelers." The color drained from Nick's face. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it all. Then his shoulders slumped. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Emily stood up, collecting their plates with mechanical precision. "Long enough to know that our friends have been lying to me. Long enough to find your second Facebook account. Long enough to realize that every business trip, every late meeting, every networking event for the past year has been a lie." "Emily, I can explain." "Can you explain this?" She pulled out her phone, showing him the photo from Antonio's. "Or this." Another photo, this time of him and Sarah entering the hotel downtown. "Or maybe you'd like to explain the credit card statements. The secret email account. The burner phone in your gym bag." Nick's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, defeat. "It's not what you think." "It never is it?" Emily's laugh was hollow. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Sarah right now and end it. Then you're going to tell me everything, every lie, every secret, every person who helped you hide this. And then? Then we're going to have a very interesting conversation about what happens next." She turned to leave the kitchen, then paused. "Oh, and Nick? I wouldn't bother trying to delete anything. I have copies of everything. Every message, every photo, every receipt. I've learned a lot about gathering evidence lately." As she walked upstairs, Emily felt strangely calm. The worst had happened, and she had survived. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because now she had to decide, was this marriage worth saving, or was it time to show Nick exactly what he stood to lose? Behind her, she heard Nick's phone buzz. Probably Sarah, wondering about their weekend plans. Emily smiled, knowing that their carefully constructed house of lies was about to come crashing down. The only question was who would be left standing in the rubble. The next morning, Emily sat in her lawyer's office, a thick folder of evidence spread across the mahogany desk. Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd handled her parents' divorce decades ago, examined each document with methodical precision. "You've been thorough," Patricia said, holding up one of the credit card statements. "Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've brought me a case." Emily felt a hollow satisfaction. "I learned from watching him cover his tracks. Everything documented, everything backed up." Patricia set down the papers and leaned forward. "With this evidence, we could go for a fault divorce. The infidelity is well documented. You'd be entitled to a larger settlement." The word settlement hung in the air like smoke. Emily opened her mouth to respond when her phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez's name flashed across the screen. Her heart stopped. "I should take this," she told Patricia, stepping into the hallway. With trembling fingers, she accepted the call. "Emily." Sarah's voice was nothing like she'd imagined, older, more professional. "We need to talk. Not about what you think. Can you meet me at the bean counter in an hour?" Emily's first instinct was to refuse, to hurl accusations, to unleash months of pain and rage. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'll be there." The bean counter was a small coffee shop in the business district, far from their usual haunts. Emily spotted Sarah immediately, not the seductive homewrecker she'd imagined, but a polished woman in her early 40s, wearing a conservative business suit and minimal makeup. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said as Emily approached. "I know what this looks like, but you need to see something before you make any decisions about your marriage." She pulled out a laptop and opened a series of files. "I'm not having an affair with your husband, Emily. I'm helping him save your tech company." Emily stared at the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. Financial reports, market analyses, confidential corporate documents, all showing a systematic attempt by a rival company to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the software firm where Emily served as development director. "Your company's board has been compromised," Sarah explained, her voice low and urgent. "Nick discovered it during a routine audit. But the people involved, they're powerful, connected. He couldn't risk telling you directly because they're monitoring everything." "The second Facebook account," Emily whispered. Sarah nodded. "A way to communicate without raising suspicions. The late meetings, the hotel rooms, all strategy sessions with our team. I'm a corporate security consultant, Emily. Nick hired my firm 6 months ago when he first noticed the irregularities." Emily's world tilted on its axis. The jewelry store receipt, it was for a recording device disguised as a necklace. The Chicago trip that wasn't to Chicago, a meeting with federal investigators. Every suspicious text, every secretive phone call, every unexplained absence suddenly refracted through a different lens. "Why didn't he tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Because Peters follows you everywhere." Sarah's words sent a chill down Emily's spine. James Peters, the charming new board member who'd taken such an interest in her work lately. Who always seemed to know where she was going to lunch, which projects she was working on. "The company you built from the ground up, they want to strip it for patents and offshore the operations. Hundreds of jobs lost, including yours. Nick, he was trying to protect everything you've worked for." Emily's hand shook as she reached for the laptop, scrolling through document after document. Evidence of corporate espionage, leaked trade secrets, manipulated stock prices. A conspiracy that went all the way to the top. Those networking events Nick attended. Gathering evidence. The burner phone. Secure communications with our team. Every move calculated to keep you safe while we built the case. Emily remembered Nick's face when she'd confronted him last night, the defeat in his eyes. He'd rather let her believe he was unfaithful than risk the operation he'd spent months orchestrating. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah glanced at her watch. "Right now, Nick is meeting with the FBI. Tomorrow morning, there will be raids, arrests. The whole thing blows open. Unless someone warns them, Emily realized with growing horror. Unless someone tips them off that Nick's been investigating. She thought of her meeting with Patricia, the file of evidence she'd compiled. How many people had she told? How many leads had she unknowingly created for anyone watching? Her phone buzzed, a text from James Peters, "Sorry to hear about the trouble with Nick. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." Emily looked up at Sarah, panic rising in her throat. "They know, don't they? They've been watching me this whole time." Sarah's expression confirmed her worst fears. "We need to move fast. Nick's life may depend on it." As they rushed from the coffee shop, Emily's mind raced. She'd spent months thinking she was uncovering her husband's betrayal, only to discover she might have accidentally exposed the biggest risk he'd ever taken, one he'd taken for her. Now the question wasn't whether to save her marriage, but whether she could save her husband's life before her quest for truth destroyed everything they'd both fought to protect. The next 2 hours became a blur of desperate damage control. Emily sat in Sarah's unmarked SUV, making calls to everyone she'd confided in about Nick's affair. Each conversation felt like defusing a bomb. "Rachel, listen carefully," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If anyone asks you about Nick, about anything I told you, you haven't seen me in weeks. We haven't talked. Do you understand?" Through the windshield, she watched Sarah speaking with a group of serious-looking men in suits near the federal building. Time was running out. Her phone lit up with a message from James Peters, "Heard you met with Patricia Chen today. Everything okay? Let's grab coffee and talk about it." Emily's blood ran cold. She showed the message to Sarah when she returned to the car. "They're closing in," Sarah said, pulling into traffic. "We need to get to Nick before they do." Emily's mind raced back through every conversation, every piece of evidence she'd gathered. "The files I gave Patricia. Already handled," Sarah assured her. "Our team intercepted them. But Peters doesn't know that." They drove to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, they found Nick surrounded by FBI agents and computer screens displaying surveillance footage. He looked exhausted, his tie loose around his neck, but his eyes lit up when he saw Emily. "I'm so sorry," they both said simultaneously. Before they could say more, an agent interrupted. "Mrs. Walker, we need your help. You have access to the company's internal development servers, correct?" Emily nodded, understanding dawning. "The backup codes. Peters doesn't have those." For the next hour, Emily worked alongside federal agents, using her access to track the digital trail of corporate espionage. Each discovery revealed the true scope of what Nick had been fighting against. Board members taking bribes, compromised security systems, planned accidents for employees who asked too many questions. "How did you handle it?" she asked Nick during a quiet moment. "Watching me think the worst of you, knowing you couldn't tell me the truth." Nick's face was haunted. "Every day I wanted to tell you everything. But they were watching so closely. One wrong move and they'd have known we were onto them. And after what happened to Johnson." Emily remembered the news about their former CFO's car accident 6 months ago. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A commotion erupted across the room. "Peters is moving," an agent announced. "He's called an emergency board meeting for tonight. He's going to try to push through the takeover vote before we can stop him," Nick realized. Sarah was already moving. "We need to get Emily into that meeting." "No," Nick protested. "It's too dangerous." "It's our only shot," Emily said, squeezing his hand. "I'm on the development team. I have legitimate reason to be there." The plan came together quickly. Emily would attend the board meeting, wearing a recording device disguised as a pen. She would get Peters to talk about the takeover, while FBI agents positioned themselves throughout the building. As she prepared to leave, Nick pulled her aside. What I've put you through these past months." She stopped him with a kiss. "You did it to protect me, to protect everything we built. Now it's my turn." The drive to the office felt surreal. Emily thought about all the nights she'd laid awake, imagining confronting her husband's mistress, only to find herself working alongside that same woman to save both Nick and their company. In her ear, a tiny receiver crackled. "Remember," Sarah's voice came through, "Peters thinks you're emotional, angry at Nick. Use that." Emily straightened her jacket and walked into the building where she'd worked for the past decade. Security nodded her through. They'd disabled the special protocols Peters had installed. The elevator ride to the top floor gave her a moment to steel herself. She thought of all the evidence she'd gathered, thinking she was exposing an affair. How ironic that those same skills would now help expose something far more sinister. The boardroom doors loomed before her. Through the glass, she could see Peters at the head of the table, his perfectly tailored suit and practiced smile masking the predator beneath. "Mrs. Walker," he said as she entered, false concern dripping from his voice. "I heard about your domestic troubles. Are you sure you should be here?" Emily clutched her purse, feeling the weight of the recording device inside. "Actually, Mr. Peters, I have some interesting files I think the board needs to see." She watched his smile freeze, saw the calculation behind his eyes. In her ear, Sarah whispered, "We've got teams on every exit. You just need to keep him talking for 3 minutes." Emily pulled out her laptop, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Outside, federal agents were moving into position. Inside, a different kind of trap was about to spring shut. The next few minutes would determine everything: her company's future, her husband's safety, and justice for everyone Peters and his conspirators had hurt. Emily took a deep breath and began to speak, watching Peters' confident smile slowly fade as he realized his carefully constructed plan was about to crumble. 6 months later. Emily stood at the window of their new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The sound of Nick's car pulling into the driveway brought a smile to her face. No more checking tracking apps, no more late-night doubts. The truth, it turned out, had set them both free. The aftermath of that board meeting had been spectacular. Peters had walked right into their trap, his practiced corporate smile crumbling as Emily presented evidence of his own suspicious trading patterns. When he realized she wasn't there to discuss her marital problems, but rather his elaborate scheme to strip the company bare, his mask had slipped completely. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he had snarled, reaching for his phone. But by then, federal agents were already entering the boardroom. The look on his face when he realized his entire network was being rolled up simultaneously across 3 states, that was an image Emily would treasure forever. The door opened behind her, and Nick's arms slipped around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts." "Just remembering," she said, leaning back against him. "Sometimes I still can't believe how close we came to losing everything." The investigation had uncovered the full scope of Peters' operation. Dozens of companies targeted, millions in stolen intellectual property, and 2 suspicious deaths that were now being reinvestigated as potential homicides. Their company had not only survived but thrived in the aftermath, with Emily leading a complete overhaul of their security systems. "I got the final numbers from the prosecutor today," Nick said, moving to pour them both a glass of wine. Peters took the deal. 25 years, no parole. His whole network is going down with him. Emily accepted the glass, studying her husband's face. The strain of the past year had left its mark, new lines around his eyes, a touch more gray at his temples. But there was a lightness to him now that had been missing during those months of secrets and fear. "Sarah called," she said, watching his reaction with amusement rather than suspicion. "The security consulting firm wants to put you on their board." Nick chuckled. "I think I've had enough of corporate espionage for one lifetime." He hesitated, then added, "Though I did agree to do some training seminars for them. Teaching other companies how to spot these kinds of takeover attempts." They moved to the back porch, settling into the comfortable silence they'd rediscovered in the months since the truth had come out. The investigation, the trials, the media circus, they'd weathered it all together, stronger for having faced it as a team. "Do you ever regret not telling me sooner?" Emily asked, voicing a question that had lingered even as they rebuilt their trust. Nick was quiet for a moment. "Every day. But when Johnson died, I couldn't risk anything happening to you. Even if it meant letting you think the worst of me." Emily squeezed his hand. "I should have trusted you more. Looked deeper than the surface. You did exactly what any smart person would do, followed the evidence. And in the end, those same instincts helped us bring down Peters." He smiled. "Though maybe next time you suspect me of having an affair, just ask." "Next time?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Planning on giving me reason to worry?" "Never again," he said softly, and she heard the weight of promise in his words. Their phones buzzed simultaneously, a group message from Rachel. The photo showed their old crew gathered at Antonio's bar and grill, raising glasses in celebration of Peter's plea deal. Their friends had been horrified to learn how their innocent gossip about Nick's supposed affair had nearly compromised a federal investigation. They'd spent months making it up to both Nick and Emily, rebuilding those friendships on a foundation of truth rather than assumptions. "Should we join them?" Nick asked. Emily set down her wine glass and stood, holding out her hand. "Let's make an appearance. But then I want you all to myself." As they drove to the bar, Emily thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd started out thinking she was uncovering a simple betrayal, only to discover a conspiracy that threatened everything they'd built. But the real revelation had been about trust, how it could be tested, broken, and rebuilt stronger than before. They walked into Antonio's hand in hand, greeted by the cheers of their friends. Sarah raised her glass in acknowledgement, no longer the suspected other woman, but a trusted ally and friend. Kevin, who'd carried the burden of Nick's secret for months, looked relieved to finally be able to talk openly about everything. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Emily traced the familiar lines of Nick's face in the darkness. "I love you," she whispered. "Even when I thought I hated you, I loved you." Nick pulled her closer. "I love you too. Enough to risk everything to protect you. Enough to let you hate me if it meant keeping you safe." Emily smiled against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They'd walked through fire and emerged stronger, their love tested and tempered by trials neither could have imagined. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities rather than suspicions, trust rather than fear. Together, they had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the quiet courage to protect what matters most, even at the cost of your own happiness. And in that discovery, they had found their way back to each other, stronger and wiser for the journey.